Welcome to a primer on Presbytery. My name is Jeff Loach, and I serve as clerk of the Presbytery of Oak Ridges. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 40, the Bible says, "Let everything be done decently and in order." Presbyterians love that phrase because if we love anything as much as we love Jesus, it's good order. Trouble is, the context of that verse surrounds the spiritual gifts of prophecy and tongues, of which Presbyterians are often notoriously afraid. But we still cite this verse with respect to our polity and our structure, which is also notoriously orderly. We talk about the different courts of the church within Presbyterianism, and of course they're not exactly like a courtroom setting such as we see here, where there's a judge and a witness and a prosecutor and a defender. Indeed, we are all working together in these courts of the church to discern God's will. As you will know, there are several levels to the structure of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, and I like to draw it something like this. It starts with the congregation at the bottom, the foundation of the whole thing, without which much of the rest would be somewhat meaningless. Then off to the side, you have the Board of Managers, which is responsible to both the session and the congregation, or a Committee on Property and Finance, which would be responsible only to the session. And then, of course, there is the session, and the presbytery, and the synod, and the general assembly. And at the top, and we can't forget this, is Jesus, because he is the church's only king and head. Of these, perhaps the presbytery has the most crucial role of oversight because it is responsible, primarily through its clergy, to oversee everything that happens in the local churches within the bounds. I encourage you to take a look at the Book of Forms, and especially the section on the presbytery, which run from 176 to 258. This makes for good bedtime reading, and you'll find it helps you understand the role of this court of the church even better. This is available for download at presbyterian.ca.
Well, hi. I thought I'd better start this video without showing you my face, just to encourage you to carry on with it. I am Jeff Loach. I'm the clerk of the Presbytery of Oak Ridges, and I'm hoping that this little video will save you some time, for one thing, because it means that you get to jump right into your committee meeting in September, and you don't have to fiddle around with listening to me after the presbytery has sat for a few minutes. But also I want to try and be able to give you some encouragement in your role, because it is an important role that elders play in the presbytery. And ideally, I want you to be able to have some fun with this as well. So let me jump into some of the material that I want us to think about, some of the practicalities of the presbytery. Let's start from before you actually arrive. We meet monthly on the third Tuesday evening, except for July, August, and December, typically. And we begin with supper at 6 o'clock. The meeting doesn't start till 7, it starts with worship, but I encourage you to come for supper because it's a way to connect with other people. For many people, they find the most fun part of presbytery is sitting around the dinner table with their colleagues, because when you eat together, you really do get to know one another on a different level. The cost for that meal is whatever the congregation needs to recoup, but typically it's $10 or $12. So come with a few bucks in your pocket and all will be well. If you can't be here, encourage the alternate elder to come. You may be the alternate elder watching this, and that's fine. But it's important for every congregation to have its representative elder present there. And if you're done supper quickly, feel free to wander around to other tables and shoot the breeze and get to know folks. Wander around the church where we're meeting, because oftentimes you'll learn a lot about a congregation based on what you see kicking around their building. After supper, on your way to the worship space where the meeting is going to take place, you're going to find some sign-in sheets. It's an attendance list that I keep, and this is just a way for you to be able to make sure that I know that you're here. Because when we keep the minutes, we do record attendance. It's not like, you're going to fail if you don't show up, but we do encourage people to show up. In fact, I do watch the trends for people's attendance just to offer a pastoral word. If a church's elder isn't showing up on a somewhat regular basis, I may want to inquire about the person's health or something like that. So It helps if you sign in. And if there's anything in the way of handouts, most of that stuff gets emailed nowadays, but if there's anything in the way of handouts, that'll be where they're sitting, usually either in the entry to the worship space or on the front seat, kind of depending on the church and how it's configured. The business of the court does start up at 7 o'clock with worship, usually conducted by the host pastor and led according to his or her guidance from the Holy Spirit. We try to encourage that worship be not much more than half an hour, and that allows us to complete the business in a timely fashion. We celebrate communion together at the September meeting, and it's good to worship together as we meet to remind us that we're here to do God's business, not our own business. We're here as discerners together of the will of God. And once we've worshiped together, the moderator will constitute the presbytery as a court of the church with prayer, and we'll undertake the business that is required of us. Following the constitution of the court in September, the moderator installs his or her successor, and there will be the installation of the conveners of committees and this sort of thing as well. And sometimes, after constitution of a meeting, there will be some sort of special speaker or an educational opportunity, this kind of thing that allows us to stay in the loop for whatever reason. We do what all organized bodies do. We adopt the agenda, we receive and consider reports, we approve the minutes, we hear the correspondence, we receive a report from the treasurer, and then reports from committees and interim moderators. We mix it up a bit in as much as some meetings are largely dedicated to committee work. That's particularly true ordinarily in September and November and February and April. Normally we get together, we have supper, we have worship, we do a little bit of business, and then normally the presbytery will break into committees at that time. In the other meetings in October and January and March and May and June, we normally have an ordinary meeting where all the committee reports are heard, and reports from General Assembly commissioners or special speakers who may come, that sort of thing, typically are done in those kinds of months. If absolutely necessary, we do come back after committees do meet on committee nights for whatever business is required of us. But it's not a popular thing, so if we have a sense that there's going to be business, we normally try to fit it in before the committee's recess. But you never know. Sometimes we just have to be flexible and aware of these things. But the court can't meet without a 2/3 majority consent past 9:30 at night. So it's not often that happens, because everybody wants to go home. There's different kinds of meetings, as I'm sure you'll read in the Book of Forms, which is your friend, keep it under your pillow at night, in the bathroom. Although if you keep it in the bathroom, you may have trouble because it kind of induces sleep sometimes. Anyway, there are regular or ordinary meetings, which is what we do on the third Tuesday evening. There's special meetings that are called by the authority of the presbytery for a particular purpose, usually when we know it's going to come. And there are emergent meetings which happen on an emergent basis. This is often true of inductions or that kind of thing, where matters are left in the hands of the moderator, the interim moderator, and the clerk, and then a decision is made about the date, and then the presbytery is called to meet. And when a presbytery meets in emergent session, the first motion that has to be made is that the actions of the moderator be homologated in calling that meeting. Homologate is a fun word because it exists in common usage virtually nowhere but the Presbyterian Church for some reason. And it really just means the same word. That is, if the moderator calls the meeting, then when the meeting actually happens, the authority of the presbytery gives the confirmation that the moderator was right in calling that meeting. I've never been in an emergent meeting where the presbytery refused, because chances are if you're there, you're okay with the meeting taking place anyway. The presbytery proceeds through all its business by motion, and that means that someone moves a recommendation, another seconds it, and then debate can occur. And I will email you, or I'll find a way to give you a link to a couple of handouts. One of them is to a summary of Bourneau's Rules of Order. A lot of people think, oh, why don't you use Robert's Rules? Well, Robert's Rules are good, but they're American. Bourneau's rules are the rules of order of the Parliament of Canada. So that's what we tend to follow, is Bourneau's rules for governance and for debate. And do me a favor. Unless you think a motion is grossly out of order, please don't be afraid to put up your hand and second it. I think more time is wasted in presbytery meetings waiting for somebody to second a motion. So don't be afraid to just put your hand up unless you think it's a really crummy idea, because that at least moves the debate forward. Plus you get your name in the minutes, which proves you were awake, which is all good. And you have as much right to speak, by the way, to move, to second a motion, and to vote as your minister does. The genius of Presbyterian government is the parity of teaching elders and ruling elders in the courts of the church. The idea is that we wouldn't have an imbalance of opinion. In practice, of course, the clergy who never meet a microphone they don't like tend to dominate the discussion, but it need not be so. We are all mutual discerners of the will of God as presbyters. And this is an important point very often that gets missed by people, is that our main job is to discern the will of God by the Holy Spirit, not so much to represent the interests of our congregations, although there can be an element of that, and certainly there should be. But our main job is to say, what is God trying to tell us to do here? By the way, if you want to speak to an issue, you can do so by addressing the moderator, and the moderator is called moderator, not Mr. Moderator or Mrs. Moderator or Reverend Moderator, none of which are good grammar. It's the same approach as is supposed to be used in the House of Commons or at Queen's Park in addressing the Speaker, though they are actually better at breaking the rules than they are at following them. The difference is that we don't sit on opposite sides like parties. The idea is that we should be unified in our desire to see God's will done among us. So the moderator and the clerk tend to sit at the front. There is a microphone and a lectern of some sort there for people who are speaking, and then sitting in the seats in front, beyond that in the nave, are the presbyters sitting together, discerning God's will together. A lot of people wonder what my job is. As clerk, I often say that my job is to keep good records and make the moderator look good. For me, that is more or less simple to do, and I do enjoy it quite a lot. I've done it in this presbytery since 2009, and I clerked a previous presbytery in years gone by. In practice, I serve as secretary of the business committee. I prepare agendas and reports for that body. I prepare agendas and minutes for the presbytery itself. I'm a consultant on church law and governance to all committees. I prepare the directory. I keep the standing orders, which you should have received in your email perhaps by now. And I serve as a liaison for forwarded email between the higher courts and the national office and the local congregations. So there will be times you'll probably grow weary of getting forwarded emails from me, but hopefully they're of some interest to you anyway. I'm also going to give you a link to a handout from the Clerk's Handbook that you can read later, giving an idea of what happens in presbytery. Typically, I won't read that to you, but I'll make sure that you have access to a copy. The committees each serve a variety of purposes, most of which are outlined in the standing orders, which I'm sure you've read and perhaps memorized by now. Har har. Many are self-explanatory. The business committee is composed of the past moderator who serves as the convener, the clerk, the treasurer, the current moderator, and typically the conveners or some representative of each committee. And the business committee arranges the docket for upcoming meetings and deals with other matters as it needs to in the standing orders. The Pastoral Relations Committee is sometimes seen as the Presbytery Fire Department, hopefully doing more fire prevention than fire fighting in dealing with clergy-congregation relationships and visitations and that sort of thing. The Stewardship and Doctrine Committee looks after matters of stewardship and matters of doctrine, stewardship of property as well as finances and this kind of thing, and ensuring that Presbyterian sharing allocations are what they need to be, and dealing with referrals and remits on the doctrine of the church. The Local and World Mission Committee oversees the efforts of doing mission work in our own presbytery, in local congregations, and around the world in various ways. The Youth Committee oversees ministries toward youth within the presbytery and tries to get youth leaders in the presbytery together from time to time. The Congregational Life Committee is a bit of a catch-all. It deals with session records which are checked by the presbytery for proper format and other things that will be edifying to congregations within the bounds. And the Sexual Abuse and Sexual Harassment Response Team, we hope never has to meet. It is the group that only meets when there's a complaint filed against individuals responsible to the presbytery for allegations of sexual abuse and or sexual harassment. Every June, the committee roster is approved, and perhaps you do by now know what committee you're on. If you're not sure, at the September meeting, please speak to me and I'll be glad to point you in the right direction. Occasionally, there will be other ad hoc committees or hybrid teams that will be created, such as the Church Extension and Renewal team that we have, which reports both to the Mission Committee and the Congregational Life Committee. And it exists to come up with ideas for starting new churches and renewing the ministries of struggling churches. The work of the presbytery in many cases is unknown by committees. Let me rephrase that. Well, sometimes it is unknown by committees. What I meant is that it's undertaken by committees, so sometimes the meetings can seem a bit mundane. But the presbytery's role as the collective overseer of the congregations is quite important. Who is the presbytery? All of us are the presbytery. We're called to take care of and pray for congregations, to see our congregations prosper and undertake the ministry of the gospel. So at times when we hear about congregations that are not favorable in their view of the presbytery, we simply have to remind them that the presbytery is ordinary people, pastors, elders who meet together to discern the will of God. And that's both simple and complicated, but also very important. If you have any questions about anything that I've said or anything that I haven't said that you would rather I address, please feel free to let me know. You can email me at jeff@stpaulsnobleton.ca, or you can speak to me at any presbytery meeting, and anytime you have a question, I'm only too happy to be able to answer it. Check out the links for those two handouts and make sure that you have everything that you need, and I look forward to serving the Lord alongside you. God bless you.